I caught it in the way his eyes moved. Not toward her, toward the deed cabinet. That was the moment I knew. Not at the engagement dinner. Not when he showed up at my door with peonies he claimed he'd grown himself. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, and my future son-in-law was sitting at my kitchen table eating apple pie, and his eyes drifted past my daughter's face to the antique cabinet in the corner where, 18 months earlier, I had foolishly mentioned the original land deeds were kept. I'm 67 years old. I taught 7th grade English for 34 years in 3 different school districts across western Idaho. I've raised one daughter on my own since her father walked out in 1998, and I buried 2 parents, 3 dogs, and 1 sister. I know the look of a person who is calculating, and what I saw across my kitchen table that afternoon was a man doing arithmetic with my daughter's life. Her name is Emmeline. We call her Em. She is 31 years old, works as an occupational therapist at the regional hospital in Coeur d'Alene, and has the kindest heart of anyone I have ever known, which is precisely the problem and always has been. She brings home injured birds. She gives money to people on the street. She believed, for the entire 8 months she dated this man, that the universe had finally rewarded her patience by sending her someone good. His name was Brock Vandermeer. He told us he was 34. He told us he was a regional manager for a logistics company out of Spokane. He told us his mother was deceased and his father lived in Arizona and was not well enough to travel. He told us a great many things, and almost every one of them, I would later learn, was a careful arrangement of half-truths stitched together with outright lies. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. The property has been in my family since 1947. My grandfather, Theron, bought it for almost nothing from a man whose son had died in the Pacific and who couldn't bear to look at the orchard anymore. It's 240 acres of foothills with a stand of larch on the northern edge, a creek that runs ice cold all summer, and an apple orchard that my grandfather expanded and my father maintained, and that I, with arthritis in both hands now, mostly let go feral. The house is a 1920s farmhouse with a sleeping porch and a wood stove and floors. My father refinished by hand the year before he died. It is not, by Coeur d'Alene standards anymore, a small parcel. The hills have been bought up around us by people from California and Washington who want to play at being Westerners. 2 summers ago, a developer from Boise sent me a letter offering $3.8 million cash for the property. I burned the letter in the wood stove without writing back. My daughter doesn't know about the letter. She doesn't know what the land is worth now. I have raised her, intentionally, to think of it as her grandfather's apple orchard and nothing more. We don't live like wealthy people. My husband's life insurance, when he finally died in 2009, yes, the man who walked out came crawling back 2 years before he died of pancreatic cancer, and I took him in, and I do not regret it. And that is another story for another day. Left enough that I paid off the small mortgage my father had taken out for medical bills. The orchard pays its own taxes most years. I drive a 2011 Subaru. Em drove a 2014 Honda until last spring. We are, by all outward appearance, a widow and her daughter living modestly on land that's been in the family a long time. So when Em came home from a friend's birthday party in March and told me, glowing, that she had met someone, I was glad. She'd had a rough run of it. A doctor at the hospital who turned out to be married. A man from her church who she eventually realized was using her for free therapy sessions. By March, she was 30 and tired and ready to be done. Brock was, I will say it plainly, charming. He was tall. He had the kind of smile that creased his whole face, and good teeth, and he laughed at her jokes in a way that made her shine. The first time she brought him to the house, in April, he walked through the front door, took off his shoes without being asked, and complimented the smell of my pot roast. He admired the porch. He asked my father's name and remembered it the second time he came over. He brought me a bottle of Cabernet the third time, mid-range, not flashy, exactly the sort of thing a man who wants to seem thoughtful but not ostentatious would bring. He did everything right, which was the first thing that started to bother me. I have known a lot of young men in my life, and most of them, even the good ones, get something wrong. They tell an off-color joke. They put their boots on the coffee table. They use the wrong fork. They forget your name. Brock got nothing wrong ever, the entire time I knew him. Every gesture was calibrated. Every compliment was placed. But that wasn't enough to say anything. A mother who criticizes her grown daughter's boyfriend for being too polite is a mother who ends up estranged. So I kept my mouth shut and I watched. The first concrete thing happened in late May. He'd come over for dinner, the three of us, and we were on the porch afterward drinking iced tea. The sun was going down behind the larch, and Em had gone inside to take a phone call from work. Brock turned to me very casually and said, "Carolyn, can I ask you something about the property?" I said, "Of course." He said, "Of course." He said, "Where does it actually end? I've walked the orchard with Em, but I've never been clear on the boundaries." I told him, "The creek to the west, the old fence line to the north, up where the larch starts, the gravel road on the east, the neighbor's pasture to the south." I gave him the rough acreage. I was honest because I had no reason not to be, and because he was, after all, going to be family. I assumed. He nodded thoughtfully. He asked whether any of it was leased out. I said no. He asked whether there were any easements. I said no, except for the power line on the east side. He asked whether the mineral rights came with it. That was the question that made my hand pause on the iced tea glass. In Idaho, mineral rights are not something a young man asks about at his fiancé's mother's house unless he has reason to be asking, and he was not yet, that day, even a fiancé. They had been dating 2 months. I said mildly, "Yes, my grandfather bought it all together." "Why?" And he said, and this is the part I remember verbatim because I wrote it down in my journal that night. He said, "Oh, no reason. My uncle was a landman up in Montana for a while. I just got curious." He had not mentioned an uncle in Montana before. He had told us his only living relative was his father in Arizona. I let it pass. I smiled. I refilled his tea. But that night, after he'd left and Em had gone home to her apartment in town, I sat at my kitchen table and I opened a notebook and I wrote down the date and the question and his answer. I underlined mineral rights. Then I put the notebook in a drawer where I keep my late husband's reading glasses, and I went to bed and I didn't sleep for several hours. He proposed in early July. He did it the way you would expect a man like Brock to do it, at a vineyard in the Palouse. Sunset. Photographer hidden in the vines, a ring he'd selected with what he claimed was his late mother's stone, reset into a new band. Em came home that night in tears, the good kind, and showed me the ring and showed me the photos and asked me, with her whole face open, if I was happy for her. I said I was happy for her. I am a coward sometimes. I admit it. The asking started in earnest after the engagement. It was always casual. It was always reasonable sounding, but it was constant. Did I have a will? Yes. Was the orchard in a trust? No. Was Em the sole heir? Yes. Would the property pass to her free and clear? Or were there siblings or cousins who might contest? No siblings, no contestation. Had I considered, given my age, putting Em on the deed now to avoid probate? I had not and would not. Did the orchard produce enough to be considered an active agricultural concern for tax purposes? Was the well permitted? What was the assessed value versus the market value? Were there any liens? Liens! He used the word liens in my kitchen while shucking corn for me 2 weeks before the wedding. He said it the way a man says, weather or traffic, and the wife of an attorney does not toss off the word lien casually. Neither, I would venture, does a regional manager for a logistics company in Spokane. I started keeping the notebook full-time. I wrote down every question. I wrote down what he was wearing. I wrote down where Em was when he asked. Almost every question came when she was out of the room. Bathroom, phone call, helping me in the kitchen while he and I were on the porch. In September, 6 weeks before the wedding, 2 things happened that made me move from watching to acting. The first was that I drove into Coeur d'Alene on a Wednesday morning to pick up a prescription, and at the pharmacy counter, the pharmacist, a woman named Rhonda I have known for 20 years, said, very offhand, "How's Emmeline doing? Her young man was in here last week asking about your medications." I felt the floor tilt under me. I kept my face still. I said, "Oh, was he?" "He's so thoughtful." She said, "I told him I couldn't share anything without your authorization, of course, but he said he was helping you organize your pill schedule because you'd been forgetting. I have never forgotten a pill in my life. I have never asked anyone to organize my medications. I take a statin and a blood pressure pill, and I take them at 6 a.m. with my coffee, and I have done so since 2014. I thanked Rhonda. I paid for the prescription. I drove home, and I sat in my driveway for 15 minutes before I could trust myself to walk into the house. The second thing happened 2 days later. I came home from the grocery store earlier than expected. There was a wreck on the highway, and I'd taken the back road, and Brock's truck was in my driveway. I had not told him I'd be out. M was at work. I parked behind the barn and walked up to the house through the orchard. The kitchen door was unlocked. I let myself in quietly. I could hear him in the front parlor. He was on the phone. He was speaking in a low voice, but the house is old and the floorboards carry sound. He said, "It's 240, not 200. I told you. And there's water on it, the creek's year-round." He said, "She doesn't have any other family. The daughter is the only heir." He said, "Yeah, the old lady's sharp, but she's 67. Statins, blood pressure, standard." He said, "Once we're married, it's a matter of time. M will put me on title. She'll do whatever I tell her." I stood in my own kitchen, in the house my grandfather built, listening to a man tell another man on the phone how long it would take to take it all from me. I did not move. I did not breathe. I waited until I heard his footsteps go toward the front door, and then I slipped back out the kitchen door and down through the orchard, and I sat in my car behind the barn for 40 minutes until he drove away. That night, I called my cousin Hollis. Hollis is 64. He is a retired sheriff's deputy from Kootenai County. He is also, by virtue of marriage, the brother-in-law of a woman named Dorinda Quest, who works for the Idaho Attorney General's office in Boise and specializes in elder financial exploitation. I had not seen Dorinda in 12 years. I had not spoken to Hollis in 18 months. I told Hollis everything. I read in my notebook. I told him about the pharmacy. I told him about the phone call I had overheard. I did not cry, although I wanted to. Hollis listened without interrupting for almost 45 minutes. When I was done, he said, "Caro, I need you to do exactly what I tell you and nothing else. Do not confront him. Do not tell M. Do not change anything about how you behave. Can you do that?" I said I could. The next 4 weeks were the longest of my life. Dorinda drove up from Boise on a Saturday when M was at a bridal shower in town and Brock was, supposedly, working in Spokane. She came with a man named Ellis Garrity, who was a fraud investigator with the AG's office, and a woman named Pat from the Coeur d'Alene Police Department, who specialized in financial crimes. They sat in my kitchen for 6 hours. They photographed my notebook. They asked me to write down every interaction I could remember. They had me describe Brock's truck, his phone, his habits. Ellis asked me about my medications, my doctor, my pharmacist, my bank, my attorney. He asked me whether I had ever signed anything Brock had given me. I had not. Then Ellis said something that made my hands go cold. He said, "Mrs. Hennick, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. Have you experienced any unusual symptoms in the last few months? Dizziness, confusion, fatigue, beyond what you'd expect?" I thought about it. I said, "I've been more tired in the evenings. I assumed it was the wedding stress." He nodded slowly. He asked whether Brock had ever made me coffee, tea, anything I'd consumed. I said yes. He had made me chamomile tea many evenings when he and M came over for dinner. He'd been very attentive about it. He'd insisted. Pat and Ellis looked at each other. The next morning, Ellis came back with a small kit. He took a sample of my hair. He took a urine sample. He bagged the tea Brock had brought as a gift 2 weeks earlier from a specialty shop in Spokane. He told me to start drinking only water and coffee I made myself, from a sealed can, and to do it in front of M casually if Brock was around, as if it were habit. The results came back 9 days later. Low-dose benzodiazepines, not enough to harm me, not yet. Enough to make me foggy, forgetful, suggestible. Enough that, 6 months into a marriage, a doctor might believe a concerned son-in-law who reported that his mother-in-law seemed to be slipping cognitively and perhaps should be evaluated for a conservatorship. Ellis told me, very gently, that this is a pattern they had seen before. He told me Brock Vandermeer was not Brock Vandermeer. His real name was Curtis Brockton Vandermeer, and he had been investigated, though never charged, in connection with a similar arrangement in Colorado in 2019 involving a widow whose late husband had owned a stake in a silver mine. The widow had died of what was ruled natural causes before charges could be filed. Her property had been transferred 3 months before her death into a trust controlled by her new son-in-law, who had since divorced her daughter and disappeared. I sat at my kitchen table and I listened to this, and I thought about my daughter dancing in our living room 2 nights earlier in her wedding shoes, breaking them in, her face shining. I asked Ellis what we were going to do. He said, "Mrs. Hennick, we'd like to arrest him, but for the charges to stick and for us to be sure we get the people he's working with, there's at least one other, the man on the phone. We need a controlled moment. A moment where he commits clearly to action in front of witnesses, where we can document the full scope." I said, "The wedding." He said, "Only if you're willing, and only if your daughter knows." I told him I would think about it. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the front parlor in my grandmother's rocker, and I looked at the framed photograph on the mantel of my father holding 2-year-old Em on his knee in the orchard, and I tried to imagine telling my daughter that the man she had chosen, the man who had spent 8 months making her feel safe, was a professional, was a hunter, was someone who had done this before and would do it again. I wondered if she would believe me. I wondered if she would hate me. In the morning, I called Em and asked her to come for breakfast. She came. She sat at the kitchen table. I poured her coffee. I said, "Sweetheart, I need you to listen to me without interrupting for 10 minutes, and I need you to trust me." I told her everything. I showed her the notebook. I played her the recording Ellis had taken of the lab call. I read her the brief Dorinda had prepared on Curtis Brockton Vandermeer. She did not cry. That was the strange thing. She got very quiet and very still, and her hand went to her cup and stayed there, and after a long time she said, "I knew." I said, "What?" She said, "I didn't know, but I knew. The way he asked about you, the way he asked about the orchard, the way he laughed at things that weren't funny. I told myself I was being paranoid." She said, "Mom, what do we do?" I told her what Ellis had said. She was quiet for another long time, and then she said, "I want him in handcuffs in front of his fake father and whoever else he's invited. I want it on video. I want him to know that I knew." That is my daughter. The wedding was set for October the 18th at the orchard. We had been planning for an outdoor ceremony under the big larch on the north edge, with a tent for the reception. About 120 people had been invited, including, supposedly, Brock's father, who was flying in from Arizona, and 3 of Brock's friends from Spokane. In the 4 weeks before the wedding, I behaved exactly as I had been behaving. I drank his tea and quietly poured it into a houseplant when he wasn't looking. I let him ask his questions, and I answered them vaguely. I let him hug me. I let him call me Mom, which he had started doing in August and which had always made my skin crawl. Em was magnificent. She went to her dress fittings. She let him pick out the cake. She let him plan the honeymoon, which he claimed was a surprise to Belize, but which Ellis had confirmed was a one-way set of tickets in his name only. The morning of the wedding was cold and clear. The larch were turning. Ellis and Pat were on the property, dressed as catering staff. 2 more officers were in unmarked positions in the orchard. Dorinda was in the kitchen with my notebook in a sealed evidence bag. The ceremony was set for 3 o'clock. Em came down the stairs in her grandmother's veil. She handed me her bouquet to hold while she fixed an earring. She took it back. She walked out onto the porch where her father's brother, my brother-in-law Garrett, was waiting to walk her down the aisle. The music started. The guests stood. She walked across the lawn with her hand on Garrett's arm. I walked behind her, holding the train of the dress, the way my own mother had walked behind me 41 years ago. When we reached the larch, Em turned to me. Her eyes were perfectly clear. She handed me the bouquet as we had planned. Tucked into the ribbon, where the officiant could not see and Brock could not see, was a folded slip of paper. I opened it as I sat down in the front row. It said in my daughter's handwriting, "Now." I stood up. I walked forward. Ellis was already moving from his position near the tent. Pat was closing in from the orchard side. I said, "Stop the ceremony." The officiant looked at me, confused. Brock turned, his face arranging itself into bewildered concern. I said, loud enough for every guest to hear, "Curtis Brock and Vandermeer, my daughter is not marrying you today." My daughter is not marrying you ever. The Idaho Attorney General's office has been investigating you for 8 weeks. There are officers on this property. You are about to be arrested for elder financial exploitation, attempted poisoning, and identity fraud. I had practiced the speech in my bathroom mirror for 2 weeks. It came out steadier than I had any right to expect. He started to laugh. It was a small laugh, dismissive, the kind of laugh a man uses when he's buying himself 3 seconds to think. Then he looked toward the orchard where Pat was now visible. Badge out. He looked toward the driveway. He looked toward the driveway. He looked finally at Em. Em was standing in her grandmother's veil holding her bouquet. She looked at him and she said, "I knew." 2 words, quiet, clear. He ran. He made it maybe 40 yards before Ellis brought him down in the grass next to the gift table. The man who had been pretending to be his father, actually a 47-year-old former real estate agent from Pueblo named Rennie, who had 2 outstanding warrants, was apprehended near the parking area. The 2 friends from Spokane were detained as well. One of them, it turned out, was the voice on the phone I had overheard in September, a man who had been working with Curtis on this kind of arrangement since 2017. 120 people stood under the larch and watched it happen. Some of them filmed it. The video was on local news by Monday morning. After the officers had taken Curtis and the others away, the guests were not sure what to do. Em was still standing in her veil. I was still standing in the dress I had bought for $10,000 3 months earlier for the mother of the bride. Em had turned to the guests. She said, "Folks, the tent is up. The food is paid for. There's a band setting up over there. I'd like very much if you'd stay and have dinner with my mother and me. I think we have something to celebrate." It was the bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do. We stayed. We ate. The band played. My daughter danced with my brother-in-law and with Hollis and with the country doctor who has known her since she was 4. I danced once with Ellis, who is 61 and divorced and turns out to be a very kind dancer. It has been a year and 4 months. Curtis is serving 11 years in the federal system. His real father, it turned out, is alive and well in Tacoma and had not seen his son in 9 years. Rennie pled out and got 6 years. The man from the phone got 8. Em moved back into the farmhouse for 6 months while she put herself back together. She did the work. She found a good therapist. She started running. She started painting again, which she had not done since college. In May, she met a man named Pete, who is a forest ranger and who has known me since he was a child because his mother taught with me at the middle school. He is uncomplicated and kind and asks no questions about land. The orchard is still mine. The deeds are now in a trust with them as the sole beneficiary and a clause that prevents transfer to any spouse for 10 years after my death. My attorney's idea. A good one. I keep the notebook. It sits in the drawer with my late husband's reading glasses, and sometimes when the wind comes through the larch in a certain way, I take it out and I read what I wrote, and I remember that the small voice that said something was wrong was the voice I should have trusted from the very first afternoon, when a man I had just met let his eyes drift past my daughter's face to a cabinet in the corner of my kitchen. If you are a mother and your gut is telling you something, listen to it. I almost didn't. I almost talked myself out of it, the way mothers are taught to talk themselves out of everything. I almost handed my daughter and my land and the last good years of my life to a man with a calibrated smile because I did not want to be the kind of mother who didn't trust her daughter's choices. Trust your daughter, but trust your gut first. That is the whole lesson. That is all I have to give you." I've thought about that afternoon at my kitchen table many times since. The Tuesday in October when Curtis sat across from me eating apple pie and his eyes drifted to the deed cabinet. That single moment is the seed of everything that came after. If I had ignored it the way I almost did, the way every reasonable instinct in me wanted to, I would not be sitting in my own farmhouse today writing this down. The orchard would belong to a stranger. My Emmeline would be married to a man who saw her as an obstacle between himself and 240 acres, and I, in some quiet wing of some quiet facility somewhere, would be slowly forgetting my own name. What saved us was not luck. I want to be very clear about that. Luck had nothing to do with it. What saved us was that I wrote down what I noticed even when I felt foolish writing it. What saved us was that I called Hollis instead of telling myself I was being a dramatic old woman. What saved us was that Em, when I finally sat her down, chose to believe me over a man she loved. 3 quiet acts of courage in 3 different kitchens. Nothing dramatic. No grand gesture until the very end, and even then, the grand gesture was only the public form of a private decision that had been made weeks earlier. I'm 67 years old, and I will tell you the thing nobody told me when I was 30. Your gut is not paranoia. Your gut is 30 or 40 or 60 years of watching people, sorting them, learning which ones lie and which ones don't, learning what a calibrated smile looks like compared to a real one. When that long-trained part of you sends up a flare, the worst thing you can do is silence it because you're afraid of being unkind. Unkindness is not what destroys families. Silence is. I think often, too, about what Em said that morning at the kitchen table. She said she had known without knowing. Most of us live there most of the time. We see the thing and we tell ourselves we don't. Wisdom is not some lofty quality reserved for old men on mountains. Wisdom is letting yourself see what you already see. Strength is doing the small, hard thing the moment it's in front of you, not the big, brave thing later when there's an audience. If you take anything from what I've told you, take this. Trust the people who love you when they tell you something is off. And if you are the one who notices first, do not wait for permission to speak. Speak gently. Speak privately. Speak with proof when you can gather it. But speak. The land my grandfather bought in 1947 is still mine because I spoke. My daughter is alive and painting again because I spoke. That is the whole of it. There is nothing more.